On January 20th, 2025, just hours after his second inauguration, the nation's attention was fixed on Washington, D.C. as President Donald Trump prepared to make his first major move of the new term. In a highly anticipated moment, President Trump signed an executive order that sealed the U.S.-Mexico border to all asylum seekers, sending shockwaves through the country and across the world. The order declared a national security crisis, invoking rarely used constitutional powers to override existing federal asylum laws. Federal agencies were instructed to immediately repel or remove any migrants attempting to cross, regardless of their circumstances or reasons for fleeing their home countries. This was a total and unprecedented shutdown of the asylum system, abruptly ending decades of established policy. Thousands of people, many of them families and children, were left stranded in limbo, unsure of their future and unable to seek protection in the United States. For Trump's supporters, the move was celebrated as a bold and necessary step to restore order at the border and fulfill a central campaign promise. They argued it was time to put American security first and stop what they saw as chaos and abuse of the asylum process. But for opponents, the executive order was both illegal and inhumane. Immigration advocates, legal experts, and humanitarian groups argued it violated U.S. and international law protecting refugees, and would put countless lives at risk by denying them a chance at safety. The move triggered immediate legal challenges, with lawsuits filed in federal courts within hours. Across the country, a fierce national debate erupted over the balance between border security, the rule of law, and America's long-standing commitment to human dignity. The border, once seen by many as a symbol of hope and opportunity, was now transformed into the epicenter of a new, deeply divisive era in American immigration policy. The stage was set for a historic battle, one that would test the very soul of the nation's asylum system, and force Americans to confront fundamental questions about identity, justice, and compassion. Trump's executive order was the direct fulfillment of his 2024 campaign promise, a pledge he repeated at every rally and in countless interviews. He made it clear to his supporters that, if elected, he would take immediate and decisive action to address what he called a national emergency at the southern border. On his very first day back in office, he moved swiftly to shut down the border, making good on his vow to act without hesitation. Throughout his campaign, Trump framed the border as an existential threat to American security and prosperity. His tough rhetoric, promising to restore order and control, resonated deeply with voters who felt overwhelmed by record-high migrant encounters and images of chaos at the border under the previous administration. Even as border crossings began to drop after his election, Trump insisted that only a permanent, drastic policy could truly secure the border for good. He argued that anything less would be a temporary fix, vulnerable to reversal by future leaders. The nation was deeply divided. Millions of Americans welcomed the crackdown as long overdue, seeing it as a necessary step to protect jobs, safety, and national identity. But for others, the sweeping new measures felt like a cruel overreaction, punishing vulnerable families and undermining the country's tradition of welcoming immigrants. For some Americans, the border crisis overshadowed all other issues, dominating headlines and dinner-table conversations alike. For others, the harsh new policy felt like a betrayal of American values, compassion, opportunity, and the promise of a better life for those in need. The January 20th order quickly became a flashpoint, crystallizing the country's deep and passionate split over immigration. Debates erupted in Congress, on social media, and in communities across the nation. The debate was no longer just about policy. It was about identity, compassion, and the very future of the nation. People on both sides saw the stakes as nothing less than the soul of America. The executive order drew a line in the sand, both literally and figuratively, forcing Americans to confront what kind of country they wanted to be, and what price they were willing to pay for security or for compassion. A key part of the order was the abrupt shutdown of the CBP One app, the main legal pathway for asylum seekers to schedule appointments at ports of entry. This app had been a lifeline for many, offering a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Overnight, tens of thousands of appointments were canceled, erasing hope for people who had followed every rule. Families who had waited patiently for their turn were left in limbo, their dreams shattered in an instant. The story of Luis and Yen Diaz, who waited months in Tijuana for their interview, became emblematic of the chaos. Their chance at safety vanished with a single announcement. They had done everything right, yet found themselves back at square one, with no clear path forward. The administration's strategy was clear: close every route, legal or otherwise, to deter migrants from coming at all. This move was intended to send a strong message to those considering the journey. Immigration advocates called it a cruel catch-22, punishing those who tried to follow the law. They argued that it left vulnerable people with no options, forcing them into dangerous illegal crossings. The digital wall proved as impenetrable as any physical barrier. It was a modern-day blockade, using technology to deny access and control movement. For thousands, the future was suddenly uncertain, and the rules had changed overnight. The sense of betrayal was palpable, as people who had placed their trust in the system found it had failed them. The shutdown of legal pathways sent a stark message: there was no longer any right way to seek protection. It was a devastating blow to those who had hoped for a legal resolution to their plight. The consequences would soon ripple across the border, affecting not just the migrants, but the communities and systems on both sides. The impact of this decision would be felt for a long time to come. The fallout was immediate. Border cities in Mexico were plunged into crisis as thousands of stranded migrants lost their only legal path to the U.S. shelters overflowed, and organized systems collapsed into chaos and fear. Migrants like Johan Cande, fleeing real danger, now faced impossible choices: risk illegal crossings, stay in perilous border towns, or return to the threats they'd escaped. Criminal gangs preyed on the vulnerable, and reports of violence and extortion surged. The U.S. policy shifted the humanitarian burden onto Mexico, overwhelming local resources. Families who had sacrificed everything were left destitute and betrayed. The border became a wall of despair, not just a line on a map. The policy meant to restore order in the U.S. instead created chaos and suffering just across the border. The human cost was undeniable, and the crisis deepened by the day. The Trump administration defended the shutdown as a necessary response to what it called an invasion, using constitutional language to justify extraordinary executive action. Fulfilling a core campaign promise, officials claimed the move restored order and delivered on the will of the voters. Supporters saw the sharp drop in crossings as proof of success and validation of Trump's tough approach. The administration argued the policy protected both Americans and migrants by discouraging dangerous journeys. Critics, however, saw the humanitarian framing as a thin veil for a harsh, exclusionary policy. The border shutdown became a symbol of Trump's leadership style: decisive, controversial, and deeply polarizing. The debate over its morality and effectiveness raged on. The border closure was just the beginning. The administration soon launched a sweeping interior enforcement campaign. ICE expanded its focus, targeting not just recent arrivals but long-term residents, leading to high-profile raids and a surge in deportations. Nearly 200,000 people were deported in the first 7 months of 2025, creating a climate of fear in immigrant communities. New laws like the Locke and Riley Act broadened grounds for removal, giving ICE unprecedented authority. Supporters praised the crackdown as restoring the rule of law. Critics warned of family separations and economic disruption. The scale and speed of enforcement drew comparisons to controversial programs of the past. The domestic front of the immigration battle became as contentious as the border itself. The nation was forced to confront the real costs of mass deportation. Trump's sweeping order didn't emerge from nowhere. It built on years of expanding executive power over immigration. Policies from previous administrations, including Biden's 2024 asylum restrictions, set legal precedents for unilateral action. Court decisions had repeatedly deferred to the executive on border security, emboldening Trump to push the limits. What began as temporary crisis measures became tools for permanent change. Human rights advocates found their earlier warnings ignored as the system ratcheted toward ever greater exclusion. Each administration's actions laid the groundwork for the next, showing how policy fixes can become the foundation for sweeping transformation. The border shutdown was the culmination of a long bipartisan evolution. The 2025 border shutdown ignited a debate at the heart of America's identity: security, economics, and morality. Supporters argued it restored sovereignty and order, pointing to the drop in crossings as proof of success. Business leaders warned of economic fallout, with disrupted trade and threatened supply chains risking jobs and higher prices. Critics called the policy a betrayal of America's humanitarian legacy, citing families stranded and the violation of refugee protections. Legal battles erupted, with courts and Congress locked in a fight over presidential authority. The question remains, is a secure border worth the cost to America's values and global standing? As of late 2025, the nation is still searching for an answer. The struggle over immigration continues, shaping the country's future.